Well, hey there, folks. Welcome to Get Centered, where the clinicians and practitioners from the Center for the Healing Arts and Sciences come together and talk about important topics. My name is John Price. I'm co-owner and co-founder of the Center for the Healing Arts and Sciences, and I welcome you. We've got a bunch of episodes, so be sure to explore the YouTube page. On that note, be sure to like it, subscribe it, and hit the notification bell. Today's episode is on giving and receiving, and considering the time of year, it's on a lot of people's minds. Maybe one more than the other. You may find that you have a preference for one more than the other. But we talk about that. We also talk about the positives and negatives of giving and receiving. We talk about clean and dirty giving and receiving. And there's a list of resources and questions at the very end, so be sure to hang out. For now, we're glad you're here. Welcome. Hope you enjoy it.
Hello, thank you for being here today with us on Get Centered. We're going to talk about giving and receiving, but holistically, which is a little different than we might normally think about it. And I want to pause for a second. Speaking of giving and receiving, please subscribe to this YouTube channel if you haven't already. Please like it and hit the reminder bell so that you get alerted when we release new episodes. So it is the season of giving and receiving, right? Holidays are upon us, and we tend to think of either giving or receiving as sort of a one-way ticket. And we tend to think of ourselves as better at one than the other, or one is more virtuous than the other. But that's actually pretty incomplete. And it's, even if you think, for example, that giving is more virtuous than receiving, and so that's all that you do, you might potentially be disrupting the holistic flow of giving and receiving. And so in your attempt to be virtuous, you might actually be harming. So keeping that in mind as we have this conversation. I'll just start with the idea of interdependent opposites once again, just very briefly. We've talked about this before, how we think of opposites as being two things that are just one's on this side and one's on the other, but they are very much partners. They need each other in order to exist. I can't turn off a light if it's not already on, and vice versa. I don't understand what hot is if I haven't experienced cold. So, same thing is true with giving and receiving. We need both of them. They are interdependent opposites. And if you think about it, if there's no one there to receive a gift, you can't give anything, and vice versa. And this shows up in nature. You know, we always try to take it back to nature and see how this is reflected in the macro around us. You know, keeping it simple, we couldn't have fire if wood didn't give of itself. We couldn't have lush plants if water didn't give its hydration. You know, so we need both. We need both, and one is not better than the other. Let's stop here for a second and see, with each of us, let's have a check-in. Does anybody struggle with thinking or believing or acting as if receiving and giving are equally valuable?
I'm a giver. I much prefer to be on the giving end of things. I think it makes me feel good to be able to give. And then receiving is hard. That's hard for me. It's like I can give a compliment all day, but to receive it, it feels like uncomfortable in some way.
Yeah. Who else?
Not personal, my thoughts aren't how I give or receive. My thoughts are about attachment, and how a lot of times I think it's a function of like a cultural or collective issue, because a really healthy attachment is the ability to give love, to give care, and the ability to receive it. And so it's a fluidity that we can kind of operate in both spaces. And it's because of we've been in a home where people are generous with themselves. They connect when needed. They provide structure when you need to have structure, but do it in a nurturing way. It's not kind of narcissistic, and that you're not doing everything I need you to do, or the narrative isn't, do as I say, not as I do. That we grow up in a home where there's simultaneously a spirit of adventure and risk, and putting oneself out there. And there's also a spirit of security and safety and I can go to my hidey hole and into my family home, and I can feel like I'm protected from things that are scary to me or overwhelming to me, literally outside of me or inside of me, that I have people that are able to help me understand the kind of aversive, overwhelming, emotional, and kind of my nervous system. They help me understand how to regulate myself, how I can put my mind to something and accomplish it. So all of that stuff happens in a real healthy dynamic. It's just unfortunate that a lot of us didn't have that. It's not a bad thing. It's just that we're unconscious of it. And so we grow up with certain limitations, and then we carry those out as if they are the way that things should be, unaware of the fact that we're consistently getting pinged by what we didn't have, or what we couldn't do, or what we couldn't give, or what we couldn't receive. So I think that where I am initially is that just really validating that it's not, I like what you're saying, Lila Scott, about it being interdependent, is that we really want to figure out how we do both. And if we can do some self-reflection and find out in our family of origin where the wounds happen, or was it giving or receiving, and help us understand what we're doing today.
I mean, for me, a little bit similar to what Ariel said. I think that's a little bit easier for me. But as Ariel was talking, I was also thinking, that it's also important to expand maybe our definitions of giving and receiving, because when he was describing it, he was receiving of good feeling about his giving. So one question is if we can be really conscious of the interchange that was happening there and the motivations behind it. Maybe we can just look at giving and receiving in more complex ways, rather than, especially at the holidays, rather than being so concrete about them.
Yeah. Eduardo?
Yeah, and I was thinking about it in terms of there's a positive and negative to everything. And, in giving, the positive side is generosity. On the negative side, you have people pleasing and to your detriment there.
Mm-hmm.
And then on the receiving side, on the negative side, it could turn to selfishness and hoarding. And on the positive side, it's, openness and the ability to be vulnerable. And so, kind of like John said, it's, where is the healthy energy in both of those ideas of giving and receiving?
No, there was a couple things. I mean, from like a cultural standpoint, I mean, we see value in what we give and what we receive in so many different ways. In the Chinese culture, people like to or are wanting others to give more than to be the ones to receive. On the other hand, it's also where do all of us find value within the process, and what makes us feel uncomfortable in the moment when we're doing essentially both. The other thing that just kind of popped into my mind is, are we able to both give and receive to ourselves in the moment? I think that it's important to set an intention on our day-to-day, even if it's showing ourselves compassion, showing ourselves love, nurturing our health, practicing self-care. So it's just the other thing that popped up.
Yeah, that's a huge aspect. And y'all hit on this, but it's not just about this material idea of, here, I bought you something, I'm giving it to you and you're receiving it. There's all kinds of ways we're giving and receiving. And like you said, Gia, even within our own selves. So like, for example, when I went to bed last night, I had to give up some of my waking hours in order to rest. There had to be, something had to give, when I go out in the backyard and gather eggs for breakfast, I get to receive the nutrition and energy from those eggs, but the chickens gave them, so it's just happening everywhere. It's not to think abstractly about it, is certainly interesting. And there's the idea of giving and asking for help, giving and receiving the material gifts, giving up old things to let the new come in. You know, maybe it's somebody who hangs on to an old unhealthy relationship and they're just kind of scared to let it go because it's somebody that makes them feel wanted from time to time. But really that new ideal relationship can't come in until they've fully let go of the old. But the other thing I wanted to hit on is this idea of clean giving and receiving and dirty giving and receiving. You know, because some of what you were hitting on, John, there is that there can be a healthy attachment to these things and an unhealthy one, depending on what our history was like and who we're in, you know, present relationship to. But if I'm giving something to Ariel with the expectation that he now owes me something, or if he decides to repurpose that gift in a way that that's not how I meant him to use it, and that bothers me, you know, and it doesn't have to be an equal exchange. Sorry for the lawn people outside, but it doesn't have to mean that, okay, I gave him a plant and so I want him to give me a plant back. It could be I gave him a plant and so now he owes me an hour of his time on Saturdays when he doesn't have an hour to give. Or a parent who's like, I'll watch your kids. Yeah, but now I gotcha. You owe me. You know, so watching the clean and dirty giving, and then the receiving piece is somebody who continues to receive on those gifts that they never wanted in the first place. And they do become beholden to the giver because they're choosing to receive them. So I wonder if any of y'all have examples of things like that, or if anything comes to mind with that notion.
Well, I think, you know, in families a lot, especially family of origin, you know, there are people that come into therapy saying, you know, I had very supportive, very giving parents. I'm not sure what's going on. But when things are given not in a clean way, as I said, with a lot of strings attached, you know, that can create a lot of complication because the person feels, well, you know, this person's being so generous to me. But then, you know, in sort of a kind of a Buddhist way of getting, it's about the motivation, and the motivation saturates, you know, what is being given. And we can't, you know, separate those two. And sometimes when the motivation is not clean, it can be very confusing for the receiver. And so that's why I think, you know, just an awareness of, again, as Eddie put so beautifully, the sort of positive and negative or healthy and unhealthy sides of both, for us to be very aware of, you know, whenever we're giving and receiving, you know, just checking our motivations, checking our awareness of what's really happening.
I was thinking about how communication is a really good image for this. That you know, I can be doing all the things that signal to you that I'm listening. Yet what I'm really doing is trying to create my next response. And so I've already got a pre-existing understanding of what's going to happen or what you're saying. And so there's a closedness, you know, and I don't know how this fits, but as I've been listening to you all talk, and check me on this, but I think there's one thing that we truly have to give, truly, and I think it's our attention. I think that by giving loving attention to self or an other, that's one of the most important things that we can possibly give. It's just that attention has all kinds of complexes and issues with it. So I can give you loving attention and be present with you. I can also give me loving attention and be present with me. I can respond to myself. I can also listen to my body. You know, I can connect with you and I can listen, or I can have some idea of what I need or how this is going or what's happening. And that creates an obstruction in the flow of the energy, for lack of a better term. I think that when we've learned how to give and receive, the energy is fluid, it's unobstructed. And so whether it's a gift of something that has no strings attached, and I'm giving it to you because you need it and I have it, you know, or it's you really need me to be present with you and I'm able to do that. It's a gift of attention. I think that that's truly one of the core essences of giving and receiving, and everything else just kind of is an offshoot of that thing that we truly have, which is our attention, our presence, which sometimes, I think, Rodney, what you were talking about is, it's called instrumental care. When when people come into our offices and they say, "Oh my God, my family was great. They paid for this amazing school, and they always dropped me off at this place, and they gave me all the clothes, and they took me to the store, and they did this," but there's not the attunement. I know you, I see you, I want to make time for you. You matter to me. Then, and if you don't have that, then we end up with these surrogates, these materialistic surrogates that are placeholders for real, genuine, loving attention and connection.
Yeah, as you were talking, I was thinking though that that's a particularly tricky one in terms of that clean and dirty idea of like, can I give this attention without holding this over the other person's head? It's not to receive anything. It's just because I care for that person, and so I'm going to give them my loving attention. And also checking in with, am I just being nice? Or do I really have this to give right now? I think we've all been trained into being nice all the time. And then we are giving from a really dirty and empty place too. So that one I think can be a little insidious.
Well, and it can, I think, but at the same intentions that we were talking about from the materialistic perspective are, of course, there with the attention. If I'm being manipulative and doing it so that I get something, that's just an extension of what we're talking about. It's a little like those concentric circles. The same things can apply on each level that we're talking about, whether it's the material, whether it's the spiritual in terms of the sacrifice. If I'm just giving to my holy place because I think that it's going to reserve some spot in heaven for me, that's an unfortunate kind of theology that we can then break down and somewhat reduce it to what happens inside of us with our sense of attention, with our sense of reciprocity, with how energy flows in and flows out. And so you can analyze whether it's spiritual or interpersonal or psychological or biological. Part of the grieving process is bargaining. And how often do we bargain with ourselves? If I do that, I can get this. If I bow down to this, then God will give me a place in heaven. If I give you this gift, then you're going to like me. All those things are opportunities or entry points to understand our relationship to the ways in which we give and receive.
Well, so I have the question of, how do we remedy this idea, this imbalance? I mean, here we are all people who have vocations. We have been called to a service industry in the healing arts, and so there is just probably an overwhelming percentage of individuals who are drawn to this type of work who do have a difficult time receiving because there feels like there's something to give. What do you call it? Voce Deus, probably not pronouncing
Voice
it.
of God.
Voice of God, that vocation. So how do we remedy this idea of that receiving is just as valuable? Because, I can think of the person, that I know in my community who, yes, she gets a sense of joy out of giving, but the amount that she gives, the amount of her time, the amount of baking, the amount of showing up somewhere, and by the way, also is dealing with a very serious illness and has a hard time when somebody wants to show up to help her, there's this interesting sort of like subtle, if we really understood, if I believe that it's better to give than to receive, I'm actually kind of insulting the people I'm giving to. Right?
Well, I think it's clarity of expectation. Like, what are the expectations? And they're usually implicit or unconscious when we give or receive. And I think maybe the remedy here is just to be explicit about, like, hey, I'm buying you this drink, and it doesn't mean you need to buy it the next round. It's just, you know, I appreciate you. Here's a drink. Or, you know, I'm paying for my kids' college. Like, what are the expectations? You know, let's be explicit about what the parent expects of the child uh, in paying for that tuition. Or, just, giving to a person who's begging on the street. What is the expectation there? And I think it's just being conscious of what we're doing could take us a long way, I think.
Yeah, I think I want to come back to Leila Scott's point on that kind of like giving, but there's some kind of undertone of like, if I'm giving to you, then you're the vulnerable one. I'm the one who's got the power, right? There's a sense in which you're like, you may not even be conscious, right? It's just, but it feels like, oh well, if at least if I'm on the giving side, then I'm the powerful one. And then we're not, what we're saying is there is a judgment in there. It's like, I can't receive then, because what that receiving equals vulnerability, and I don't want to be that vulnerable, powerless person, right? So there's some way in which even if you are like mostly pure intention, mostly clean intention, when there is that little piece of this makes me less vulnerable, then it actually does kind of taint it a little bit, right? It kind of takes it into a little bit into the dirty category, because you may have the best of intentions, but if you're never really able to receive, then what you're saying in some way is, I think receiving is less, right? And then even in your giving, you're changing the power dynamic. You're not in an equal relationship. You're placing yourself above and need to give in order to feel that way.
Does anybody have something? I don't want to.
Yeah, I would just add on that power dynamic that Ariel was talking about. I think that's big. Jung has the quote, where there is the will to power, there can be no love. And I think that resonates with me quite a bit.
I was going to say this sort of insight that I had earlier about it is that it's like receiving is sort of like the ugly step sibling to giving, much like depression is the ugly step sibling to anxiety. We've talked about before, right? There's sort of a cultural reward around anxiety and busyness and so forth. But if I'm depressed and I really don't have anything to give right now, and I got to be still and reset, that's not so rewarded. In fact, it's probably considered more pathological than anxiety. So I think there's a parallel.
I think, I mean, it's a family show. We don't necessarily need to go this direction, but giving and receiving certainly has sexual connotations. And I think, from a psychodynamic point of view, sex is a beautiful metaphor, because the flow of giving and receiving can go very right or very wrong. And that's more experiential. And another reason sex comes up so much in dreams is because it sets up this flow of energy in a very sort of physicalized, experiential, literal sort of way. But I think it does create a great metaphor for what it means to give and receive in an open context, like John was saying, that there aren't barriers, that it's understood that the giving and receiving are interdependent. And that's sort of how you started off the whole conversation with Scott.
Yeah, I mean, that is an incredible point, and such a reflection of probably what the giving and receiving is like in the relationship at large, I would imagine, except that, there sadly is so much trauma, that comes to a relationship with people's sexuality. And so I think often we're just playing out wounds, and that's probably its own episode. But you're right. Absolutely.
Well, yeah, Rodney, that's a good point. I talk to couples a lot about sex and the way that they they explore each other's bodies, they show up, and can oftentimes use the everybody's got a typical way of their sex life, and we fall into habits and patterns. And so you can kind of reanimate that with a couple and say, well, how does this usually go, and what usually happens, and what's left out, or what's included, or are there any fantasies that you have about what you like, or what do you not express about your sexuality that you're scared to, and that becomes an enormously large metaphor. Leela Scott, to your point about kind of looking at all these examples, whether it's your generosity with money or time, or how things play out sexually, or anything else, can be an indicator of what's going on in your history and in the present moment, that opens you up to understand what's happening in the unconscious that you may not be aware of, that you can only get little indicators of by looking at these little blips at the surface of the water, that show up and emerge. You say, oh, I'm actually taken into an expansive part of myself and my relationship to how I am present and give and receive.
Well, and then we have the flip side, right? Like accepting an act of sex when you don't really want to, because you feel like that's going to preserve the relationship, or you'll have conflict if you don't. So there's that as well,
Well, and that should be like, that is the umbrella of sex. I mean, any image of sex, it really is the way in which you approach sex in general, whether it's withholding or fear, or there's a too muchness associated with it, whether it's people pleasing or anything else. That dynamic is pretty fundamental, and it does actually wrap up everything from our physiology and biology to our spirituality, and shows us how we are in those moments of true vulnerability and nakedness.
Yeah. Well, and taking it back to something a little lighter, like who very easily says thank you here when you receive a compliment? Does the word thank you, or the words thank you, do they just fly out of your mouth after a compliment? Or do you try to qualify, oh, well, I've been practicing, or, oh, with this old thing, somebody gave it to me, or no, actually, I don't agree with you at all?
You may be the one to catch me on this, but I think I do pretty well at that, accepting something.
Yeah.
But it could be even the opposite of that, when somebody says thank you, and then you say thank you. It's thank you, thank you.
Like hot potato.
Yeah, thank you. Oh, you're welcome. Like, yeah, I did something for you. It's cool. We're good. Not thank you, thank you.
Yes. Yeah, it's sneaky, super sneaky. And then there's accepting a compliment you didn't want in the first place. If somebody is objectifying somebody, nice bod, do I have to say thank you? No, I don't have to. I can send that back. Terrible tie choice.
Let's just aware of time. If we start to kind of tie this up, what are the little nuggets that you think are important for people to take away from this?
Mm-hmm. Well, I would start by saying that giving and receiving are equally valuable. If we only have givers, there's nobody to receive. And if we only have recipients, there's nothing to give, nobody to give. Mm-hmm. So to reinstate, if you don't already have one, the balance, allowing yourself to receive as much as you are willing to give, or if you find that you're a taker, noticing this. And it helps to notice the people in your life around you. Maybe you can think of somebody, oh, you know what, now that I think about it, so-and-so is really, really good about both receiving and giving. I see them modeling that for me. I'm going to notice that in them and also try to emulate. So that's one thing, that they're equal. I would say watching out for the difference between clean and dirty. And John, I have a list here that I've created of, examples of dirty giving and dirty receiving, and then how to avoid dirty giving and dirty receiving. It's probably too long. Go through it? You want me to?
Yeah.
Okay, it's pretty straightforward. Dirty giving, you expect something in return for giving your gift, even if you don't want the exact same thing in return. So if I give a material gift in exchange for that person's time, like I said before, you guilt the person you gave the gift to in one way or another when they don't reciprocate. You give a gift with the intention of that gift being used in a very certain way and feel offended if the receiver uses it in another way, or maybe even pays it forward instead of back. Dirty receiving, you'll feel like you owe something in return if you take the gift. You feel like you're being objectified by the gift, just talked about with the compliment. And intuitively, it just feels icky. There's something, even if you can't put your finger on it, there's just something that doesn't feel right. That would be something to look for. And a way to bring awareness to these things is to ask these questions. What is my intention for giving this gift? Do I give this gift freely with no expectation for anything in return? Am I only giving this gift because I want something back from this individual or from God, like you said earlier, just a point system somewhere? Can I receive this gift and truly feel like the gift is mine to keep or repurpose how I choose? Can I pay it forward instead of back? Am I free of all unwanted binds to the giver of this gift the moment I say thank you? And then the third thing I would say is that we tend to have a relationship with receiving that's scarce. It's like, whether it's universal abundance that we're trying to receive upon, or what I want to ask for Christmas, I shouldn't ask for too much. I'll just take a little bit, to practice gobbling up abundance, not in a greedy way, not taking more than you need from somebody who's going to miss it if you take it, but just conceptually, what would my life look like if I really went for it? If I fully received as much as I'm willing to fully give, or vice versa, if the trouble is reversed in your personal experience.
It didn't occur to me until just as you were talking, Scott, about I remember there's a responsibility for giving charity in Judaism and many traditions. And I remember one of the spiritual teachers, and I can't remember who it was, but they said that when somebody asks you for charity, when they put their hand out, your response should be thank you. Like, thank you for giving me the opportunity to give in some way, as opposed to sometimes I think we can get into the feeling of, they keep asking, they keep wanting, or like, I saw this guy on the street yesterday, or has been here for 2 weeks, or how couldn't they get out, there's a mentality that we kind of can lean into, which is, the fact that they need something means that I have an opportunity to give, and that actually is something to be grateful for, because if it wasn't for them, I wouldn't have a place to land my gift, my abundance. That's on the giving side of things, which is, I'm still developing the other side. I'm working on that. We're working on it. But I think we're getting better at that other piece of how do you take it in and understand that actually is a gift to the other person too, right? It gives them an opportunity to come outside of themselves as well in that exchange.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you reminded me of a slightly more abstract version of that, which is like, if you can think of somebody in your life that just drives you bananas, you think they're annoying or whatever, to thank them. Oh, wow. Because I can't be me and feel good about who I am if I don't know who you are and not like what that looks like. So thank your enemies, thank the people that annoy you, because that's the only reason why you get to feel good about yourself. Just like the not understanding hot without cold. Mm-hmm.
What else? Any other closing thoughts?
I think we're complete, huh? So we'll post all those lists in the liner notes, and just want to thank everybody for being here today and listening in. Please comment. Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm going to receive that. Please reach out to us if you have any other topic ideas, and if you have any comments on this episode. Subscribe, like, share, And thanks. Have a great day.